Hey, everybody, this is Devin with Mark Advantage. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am honored and privileged by being joined by Joel Landi of the Performance Group. Joel is focusing on leadership and cultural shifts as it relates to coaching executives of many different companies across the US. And Joel has just really fascinating experience, so I thought he'd be a great guest to have on our podcast today. So, Joel, thank you so much for joining us.
Devin, thanks for the invitation. Fired up to be here.
Awesome. Well, I know that you're definitely going to talk to us about TPG throughout this podcast. But first, I heard that you have some experience in the Navy. Talk to me about that. What was that like?
Well, first, spoiler alert, some of these answers are probably going to overlap in the questions that I think you and I are going to cover. And that's intentional because I think there's been some really unique things that I've been able to experience in the 3 careers that I've had that led up to me founding the Performance Group. But, you know, the military was a really special chapter in my life. I mean, I feel so honored that I had a chance to wear a uniform and become an officer and go to flight training. And but it was really cool because a lot of the lessons, which I'll share about in a little bit later about in our company with clients and small businesses and top teams, were actually formatted and learned as a naval officer. And so we had the honor of serving the 3rd Marine Air Wing out here in Southern California. But basically, we worked with a bunch of jet pilots, and we taught them everything from, hey, if you're at 35,000 feet and your oxygen system begins to fail, what happens with your vision, to when you engage in air-to-air combat and your G suit comes on, you know, how do you maximize performance in a 7G pull? Sometimes where they had to ditch a $50 million aircraft because something went really wrong. How do you get out of the aircraft without losing your elbows? So we specialized in ejection seat systems, in night vision goggles. We were out at night training with them, dropping bombs in the desert on night vision goggles. And so we did a lot of really interesting things. And then as well as a whole water survival training piece where, you know, some guys went down in the water. They ditched their jets. They ditched their helicopters. We had a very sophisticated device that actually simulated a helicopter sinking in the water. And most people probably don't know this, but it is pretty common because of the mission of the helicopter in the military that they do go down in the water, over the water. And what happens when they hit the water is they rotate upside down because of the weight of the motors on top of the actual fuselage. And so we've trained aviators how to actually get out of a fuselage that is underwater. And once I had a situation, an encounter with a young man who came up to me probably 6 years after he received the training. This was complete happenstance. It was on a beach in New York on Long Island. And he was a sergeant and he was overseas active duty. And we began to talk about our history in the military. And about 5 minutes later, we put 2 and 2 together. He said, you know, you trained me at El Toro in Southern California. Our helicopter crashed. It sunk upside down, and I got out because of the training that your unit gave me. And I just felt like at that moment, you know, all the years of training and all the hard work, it was in that moment, I'm like, wow. Like, you know, I've never had anybody come back to me and like, you know, this training saved my life. And it literally did. So wow. a lot of cool stuff. I mean, we taught people to do everything except wrestle sharks, you know. It was really, although I think maybe the Navy's open to that option. So obviously all those lessons, you know, and there were some profound lessons, which I think we'll cover a little bit here in the interview, but that type of training, you know, getting people prepared for those scenarios, you know, there's a sequence of events with steps and mindset that now I use when I coach executives and top teams and culture shift and resolving a conflict or just up-leveling leadership.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like some pretty incredible experiences all the way around, but, you know, real world tangibility, right? And I mean, even, you know, what you were teaching that group of pilots saved that guy's life. That's truly incredible. Like it definitely makes you realize just how much of an impact you can have on somebody, kind of bringing in that realization. So that's amazing. How does that relate? How does some of your experiences in the Navy relate to your career arc? Like what does that look like?
Well, I think, so one of the biggest lessons I learned in leadership, and I laugh because, you know, we learn through hardship, right? We were the #1 training unit in the country back in 1994. I was a young lieutenant. I was in a dream career, married at that time for 6.5 years, surfing, training for triathlons. I mean, it was really a little bit of a fantasy life.
Mm.
And I offered to throw a Christmas party for my staff, which was 15 people. And as the introduction, the invitation went out, my Navy divers said, "Lieutenant, is it optional?" And I just thought it was just an interesting question. I said, "Of course, it's a party." Well, out of 15 people, 4 showed up.
Hmm.
And here's what I learned. What I learned was, if you elevate performance over relationships in a company, you'll get results, but you'll never get loyalty. And the results are not sustainable. They're really short lived. And so that was one of the big
Mm.
touch points I learned that I now bring into companies, which is we talk a lot about the culture of trust and mutual respect. And we talk about this idea that, the motto for my company is, how do you keep the bar high, but how do you keep the people happy? And a lot of companies just want to keep the bar high. And as you know, a lot of business at the end of the day is about revenue, and it's about shareholders. It's about quarterly profits. And so, my impact is really reaching after and challenging the heart and minds of the leadership of a company to really understand that you can be successful, but you have to care for people. It cannot
Mm.
be something that's contrived. And it is, your people are going to see right through it, and you'll reap what you sow. And so that was one of the
Sure.
biggest lessons I learned in military leadership, and I love it.
Wow. So I guess I had actually heard a talk recently by Simon Sinek that talked about the Navy and about how, generally they would choose, Navy leadership would choose people based on the amount of trust that you have for them over their performance. They would even deny high performers if they had
Correct.
low amount of trust.
Correct.
Um, it sounds like you generally would kind of agree with that statement. Like you'd even take a medium or even consider a low performer, but if you trust them, you're definitely gonna and have that relationship with them. You're gonna want them more on your team.
Yeah, because I mean, I think trust in a culture, trust is the foundation. It's the starting point. It's the building block, and you can build on top of trust. Look, if I don't really know where you're coming from, you can be a high achiever, but how am I actually going to rely on you when I need to rely on you? And how am I really even going to how am I going to even know who you are if you are holding back from me and you're not really honest with who you are and what you do? So I completely concur. I agree with Simon Sinek. And, but building trust is an intentional thing, but it is the foundation of culture, the way I see it and the way I teach it.
Hmm, that's interesting. So, do you have? Oh, actually, let me ask first. How does some of your experiences within the Navy kind of go on and continue your current approach to coaching leaders in small companies? You've talked a little bit about building that foundation for trust and the cultural shifts, but talk to me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think on the leadership side, I just think it's how do you lead people, and win their respect? And I think one of the sayings that I had is, I think leaders need to be first, um, to serve, and they need to be last to eat. So leadership's about going first, and it's about eating last. It's about this selfless spirit, which it really is. It's a difficult thing, and if
Yeah.
some leaders do live in an ivory tower, and that's their leadership model, and that if that's how they want to go through life, then that's their decision. But I think this idea that leaders can be a part of a culture, that they can be seen as going first, they can be seen as deferring some of their needs for the sake of developing and providing wisdom and an actual tangible leadership of other people, is just a very powerful thing. And so I think there's that. I think one of the things that I like to also focus on in my leadership approach to helping other leaders is the idea of, are you aware enough about even your own emotional state? A lot of the training that we had to
Mm.
do, when you put a group of aviators in a plastic cylinder and sink it upside down in 8 feet of water blindfolded, if you don't
Mm.
get them mentally prepared for that, it's scary.
Yeah.
Now, for some guys growing up, in California or New York that maybe surfed, are like, okay, this is fun. But a guy from Michigan or El Paso, it's going to be kind of scary. So So I
Yeah.
think my approach in the military was, how do we get them to be at peace, so that they can step into a series of steps and be successful. And of course, preparation was one thing that we really were good at. I mean, the
Mm,
military is really good at breaking down each event or task into small, measurable, achievable pieces. And so, I married that concept of let's break this down into small, easy to understand pieces with the idea that you've got to really be able to self-assess and be aware of your mood state. And if
mm,
you are anxious, you need a strategy that will minimize the anxiety, because without going into too much detail, but you've got the limbic brain, which is your fight or flight piece, and then you've got the prefrontal cortex, which is the
right.
part of the brain that allows you to make the best decisions possible. Well, if your anxiety level's rising, your prefrontal cortex is depressed, it's shut down. So you cannot make great choices in the presence of anxiety. So part of the training is,
Mm,
if you're about to go into something that is going to be stressful, whether it's a presentation, it might be a one-on-one conversation with somebody that's difficult to work with, it might be introducing a new idea, whatever it is that's going to cause anxiety. My approach to leadership is you have to address anxiety in yourself, and you have to teach your people to address their anxieties, because you cannot bring your best self forward if you are not managing anxiety. So those are a couple of lessons in leadership.
that's interesting. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it sounds like the Navy is kind of a business, right? Like they figured out tactical business strategies that obviously work for whether it's a military organization or governmental organization or whether it's for a business. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and then I think the other piece to add on to the culture piece, I think there's just two easy practicals that, I had a transformative event, which I think we're going to talk about in just a bit. But
Yeah.
before I do, after this transformative event, I'll create some suspense here. But one of the things I really did learn, I had, after this event in my life was, in leadership, and you can distill it into many different ways. And there's a lot of 3-point lessons in what great leaders do. For me, it was just simply two things when I left somebody that I was leading was, number one, did I really care about them? And then number two, did I impart an insight to them or something that elevated their current, whether it was their mood state, their position, the way they thought about something that they came to me with. And so I felt like those were two easily understandable and memorable ideas that if you, Devin, worked for me and we had an interaction, I would want you to leave thinking, Joel really cares about me. And that one thing he shared really helped me. It really helped me advance something that I felt like was important to me. And so I think those are two principles that any leader can hold on to. And there's great meaning in those two principles.
Mm, that's interesting. All right, you led me in enough. What were some of those events that shaped your worldview? Let me hear them.
Well, I think the biggest worldview shape, I mean, in addition to, I think, look, a lot of us grow up and we face parents that have cancer, parents that get divorced, people that died. I mean, those are amazingly powerful events in life. I mark my greatest transformative event occurred at age 30, married at the time for 6.5 years to my current wife of 31 years. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm in the middle of a dream career. And I was running on the beach one day, foot racing a Marine. I'm a Navy guy. I went all in. And by the grace of God, I beat the Marine. I remember yeah, he kept running after we ran, and I sat down, and I remember putting my hands in my face, and I started weeping, and I was looking out. It was on the ocean. It was down in San Clemente, California. And at that time, I discovered that, which I know now was early in my life at age 30, a bit of what some people might call an existential crisis. And there's a lot of different ways, you can talk about an existential crisis, but I think at some point, all of us start to kind of wrestle with, I have this, but how come I don't feel that way? Like I had the dream career, but how come I don't feel a certain way? And certainly work was fulfilling me. But what I'd come to learn, Devin, in this transformative event, which happened, by the way, in the backdrop of the Christian faith, which I'll share about,
Hmm.
It's that I learned in a very short time that I was just really disconnected to my inner self. And what I mean by that was I lived in my head. I lived for this idea that success and achievement would bring me a lot of inward fulfillment. But I learned I was starving myself. I felt like I lived in my head. I was disconnected from my heart.
Mm.
That's where, the heart is where is this, it's the seat of emotion. It's the seat of dreams. It's imagination. It's reason. Up here is just logic. This is just about figuring out problems.
Right.
Down here is really where meaning is. This is where real value is. When we get moved, we don't
Mm.
get moved in our brain. We get moved in our heart. And so I had the good fortune of going through this transformative event. And like I said, it was in the backdrop of coming to a Christian faith where I opened, the door of things like humility and forgiveness and virtue. These
Mm.
pieces opened up to me that I had no understanding of. And like I tell people when I tell this story, because, the story's not about Christianity per se. And I tell people you can have an existential crisis and come out on the other side many different ways.
Sure.
But you owe it to yourself that when things are missing and pieces are missing, you've got to have the courage to do the deep dive and go and do the analysis and confront yourself and know thyself. And so that was by far the most transformative event. And that was at age 30. And it
Mm.
completely changed the trajectory of my life. I mean, I wound up actually I became a Christian minister, which was something that even to this day, I look at my rearview mirror and I'm like, it was an act of God because I had no backdrop, nothing that would point me in that direction at that time in life, other than I'd felt a true calling. And I think, if anything, to distill it, what I felt like is up to age 30, I lived completely for myself. And at age 30, I was going to start really living for other people.
Mm.
And that really opened up a whole great world to me. And it actually, of course, formatted my drive to really serve companies and people specifically now in the performance group.
That's fascinating. So it sounds like you realized that you were in kind of the typical rat race, right? Keep trying to keep up with the Joneses in a way. Just you can never kind of achieve what you were hoping for, even though in reality that it's not the things that make you happy or, that next level up. It's the heart, it's what's inside. So I appreciate that. That's a really fascinating way of thinking about it. Definitely
Yeah.
influential.
And if I can add this, I was fortunate enough to write a book. It's called Rewired. It's on
Oh,
Amazon.
cool.
And the big takeaway to the book was something that I discovered as I went through this painful and really powerful experience of transformation. People talk about transformation, but let me tell
Hmm.
you, these are my words. When you go through transformation, it's scary, it's painful, but it's powerful. I mean, you don't mistake transformation. Transformation is truly, it is a rebirth. It's coming out from burned ashes and rising like a phoenix. But what I'd come to discover too, and I wrote about this in my book, Rewired, is, we all have stories. And we have three major stories. We have a story about us as a professional, us as a personal human being, and then us about this idea about there's something bigger or more meaningful in life. And what I've come to believe is that each of those stories, they either reward us or they punish us. And we've got to get it right. And that's, for me, it's not, life isn't hard. What's hard is the story. And if you change the story, it changes the arc, it changes the trajectory of your future. And so that was one of my greatest discoveries too. And of course, these stories live in the subconscious mind. And until you understand how to get in the subconscious mind and deal with the real story, you live on the surface and you wonder, why is this so hard? Well, it's because there's a story, but it's being lived out in the subconscious and you're just not aware of it yet.
Mm. That's great. Thank you. And good to know about the book too. I did not get a chance to read it before this interview, but I'm excited to now. I'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes so folks can find a copy of it on
Perfect.
Amazon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. So we've definitely talked about your Navy experiences, a lot of your life transformation, now leading up to today, the performance group. Give me the who, what, when, where, why behind the performance group.
Well, it's real simple. The why is, I think, when I look in my rearview mirror, and I know any of your viewers or listeners, they're going to do this right now, and they're going to go, and I do this exercise with my clients. I say, what is the golden thread? The golden thread is a theme. that starts way, way back when. That's something that draws you, that you feel like I get energized by. And for me, it's always been this
Mhm.
idea about unlocking, improving, or maximizing performance. You know, as a young man, I wanted to became an exercise physiologist. I wanted to go to the United States Olympic Committee has a training facility in Colorado Springs. I wanted to train athletes, Olympic athletes. I wound up going into cardiovascular medicine, which I love, and I have no regrets. But so this idea of unlocking potential has always been something that drives me. And
Mhm.
so the why is that very thing in the performance group, is this idea that potential can be unlocked. And for me, most people talk about mindset. I believe that a lot of the unlocking potential comes from the heart. Now, for some people, they're like, what the heck does that mean exactly? And that's why I've come, and that's why I love what I do. Is I think a lot of people disconnect the mind and the heart. And I think, especially at work, people think it's just about success, it's about metrics, it's about showing up, it's about being value driven, it's about being purpose driven, and it's about basically stuffing all the other stuff down. So that's why, and how, when, and where was just simply, me. I got an additional certification from the College of Executive Coaching, but my life had already prepared me completely, and for this task. And so, to give you an idea of the people that I've had the good fortune, and of course, I'm not going to use anybody's names, and I'll try to completely protect their identities, but
Sure.
so, what's typical is, like, for instance, I'll just give you a handful of very quick scenarios of how people come to me and what they're looking for. I've got one client who has a $5 million retail business, and she's owned it for 18 years.
Mhm.
And she was just, after 18 years, she was gassed. She was winded. She kind of lost her drive, her mojo. And we really just did a deep dive on really, why that was what it was. And a lot of my work becomes very personal. People hire me for business issues, but they become very personal very quickly, because again, a lot of motive and reason is tied into what's happening in the heart. There's a song I remember this old kind of dance song. I'm not going to get this right, but it was something like, free your mind and the rest will follow. Well, for me, it's free your heart and the rest will follow. So anyway, so these are the small business owners come to me. They feel like they're dead in the water, and basically we revive and renew the vision. We create a new strategy. We up level their culture, and that's just one type of client that would come see me. Or small business
Mm.
owners, companies from $1 million up to $100 million, but that are actually have a conflict in the top team. A lot of times, companies are started by partners or CEOs, COOs, and there's invariably this idea that I do more than you, I'm better than you, and here's the direction that we need to go for the company. And so I get hired
Sure.
to resolve conflicts when owners and executives don't want lawyers, and they feel like their HR director just can't help them at that level. And so I get called in to resolve a
Mm.
conflict. And the fun part about resolving conflicts is I really get to understand the company culture. And as I get to resolve the conflict and understand the culture, there's often an opportunity for me to share an idea about what would it look like if your culture was less like this and more like this, which then leads into this idea of culture shift and how do we create this culture of trust. And so there's that piece. It's not uncommon where IT or very techie companies have really smart engineers, which, being left brain, they're very technical. And it's not at all an insult, and it's common knowledge that people that are very technical have a lower social emotional intelligence. It doesn't mean that they're not highly intelligent people. It just means that facet of them is underdeveloped. And so it's not uncommon that I get a call from somebody that'll be like, "Hey, my leading engineer is a rock star, but every time he talks to clients, he pisses people off because he's not really filtered, and he doesn't really put a lot of emphasis. He doesn't care about the relationship. He wants to solve their problem." And so
Mm.
that's a great opportunity for me to come in and do some pinpoint executive coaching or top management, top team coaching. And in that sense, I'll do some emotional intelligence training. And that's really cool.
Mm.
Now, last two things that I love
Sure.
uh, are what I call some of these one-off offers, and they're two opposite sides of the coin. You know, one is I've done some things. I've worked one was a highly successful semi-retired lawyer here in Southern California who just didn't know what she wanted for the next chapter in life. And I do this 2-day immersion, which is almost like a retreat. And it's a highly, highly personal experience that basically gets people to bring closure to things that have happened that they've never addressed. And again, these are people and they've gone through therapy. They don't want therapy, but they need to close doors on things that they feel like are still open before they can really dream again and spring forward into this new unknown, into this new reality. And sometimes they come to me and they feel like they're half asleep and they're wounded, and yet they're highly successful in their professional life. And so that's a 2-day transformative event that's very personal. It's in part spiritual. It's part of the existential crisis piece again, so which is kind of cool. The other side of that is I love motorcycles. I race them. I love data.
Doesn't surprise me, given your background.
Yeah. And so I get the opportunity to take a handful of either executives or senior managers or top team, a handful of people, 5, 6, 7, 8 people to the racetrack. We put them in these little mock Indy cars that do about 140 on the straights. All these cars have data acquisition. And the cool thing is what we do is we look at the data and their driving performance, and we match that to how they actually are able to take input in the coaching experience. And then we link all these data points and all this feedback from how they're doing in the car and how they're responding to the coaching with how they actually are doing at work. And we come up with this really interesting 360 experience that teaches them. I've had people leave that experience like, I never realized how difficult it was for me to take direction because they're at the top of the company. Or, I never realized that I don't even ask for input. I had one executive who complained all day that they couldn't get to where they wanted to be on the racetrack. Well, it come to find out that we looked at the brake pressure, and he was braking the car like he would be braking an automobile on the freeway. And he didn't understand that you can punch that pedal and slow that car down like 10 times as fast as you would on a freeway to get, to prepare to go into a corner. As soon as we located that little piece of data, it changed his game. He went from like being 18th to being 3rd on the track. And of course, and again, that's the power of data. But we made the application as, well, you didn't ask to even understand the data that we were giving you. Are you the same way in your company? Are you really asking people to give you feedback on data? Or are you even asking people to give you feedback about you? So we connect those kinds of dots in our experiences, and it's just a ton of fun. And what a great way. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Go to the racetrack, learn some really cool stuff about yourself, and really leave there going, I've got like a handful of takeaways about my leadership style that when I go back to work on Monday, like this is real deal stuff. I can take action on these ideas and actually improve my influence and my reach in my company.
That's amazing. And it sounds like those experiences can really be impactful in a lot of different ways for leaders. I guess one thing I would love to just know a little bit more of the people that you've coached so far. Have you found kind of a shared commonality between any of them? I mean, are they all kind of feeling like they're stuck? Is that kind of the shared characteristic, or is there something else there that's underlying?
Here's a couple of shared characteristics. One is if you're at the top of the organization, you feel lonely. And it's this weird antagonism of you're the leader, you're the rock, you're the calm force, you're the voice, you're the guy with or the woman with all the answers. To be vulnerable is a liability. And so the sad part about a lot of driven, successful people is they live in isolation and they're very lonely, and they really don't have a place unless they hire a coach or they have another either peer or a mentor somewhere that's going to help them out of that. And so I think that's probably one of the largest things is the fear of I don't have all the answers, and that's why I get paid this huge salary and I'm alone.
Right.
And I think, and so that's a tough thing, but it's also a positive thing when you can own that and then get help. On the flip side of that, obviously the most destructive thing I've seen at the top of companies are leaders that want to hire me to fix their company, but they are not growth minded. And so
Mhm.
that's a disconnect. That's a total disconnect. And one of the first things I do when people hire me is in a conversation like, Devin, if you were the owner of this company, I think it's Market
Market
Vantage.
advantage. Yep.
Yeah. And so if that was your company and you had a small team, and one of the first things I might ask you after you and I kind of felt comfortable with each other is, the question would be, if you were to self-assess right now, how coachable are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And for me, anything lower than like an 8 is a little concerning for me, because if a person doesn't view themselves as very coachable, then it's a very difficult, because that, again, that's going to color the culture of the entire company. If the
Right.
leader's not coachable, how is he going to, or she going to impose this new way that we really need to have this two-way exchange of, trust and respect and information. And, when it's appropriate, we need to be comfortable being vulnerable with each other. If you're not coachable, you're not going to get there.
Sure. Absolutely. And for the record, I would put myself at a 9 on that scale. So,
Awesome. You're going places.
oh, good, good. I guess that kind of leads into the question then, why is coaching so important for any executive or leader, small company, large company? Why is it important?
Uh, One simple reason: no one gets to the top alone. No one.
Mm,
Anybody that can ever say that they're self-made, that now I believe that there are people that overcome tremendous hardship, that fight their way forward in life to get to amazing achievements. But
mhm.
you can't do it alone, right? And so one of the other exercises I do with people that I work with is I show this. There's this picture, and maybe you've probably seen it. I like these types of tools for learning and growing and
Sure.
metaphors. And there's this one picture of an elephant, and then there's 5 blind men. They happen to be Asian.
Mm,
I guess that's part of that culture. And the question when you look at this tool is, if you were to ask each man in this case how to describe the elephant that he's touching, what you get is a very honest and true but different depiction of what that elephant is. If one man is touching his side, the other man's touching a leg, the other man's touching a tusk. And of course, what we learn from
mm,
that is that each person's truth is true, and it might be accurate, but it's not complete. So our
sure.
understanding of our world is always incomplete. And we need people because we have blind spots and we have biases and we have
Right.
weaknesses. So blind spots, biases, and weaknesses, you could never, ever achieve your true potential without having somebody in your life that's going to reveal those to you and help you work past them. Just that simple.
That's amazing. That's a really good point. I guess I never thought about necessarily my own biases before, but in a leadership role, that could definitely be impactful. To understand, even just understanding those alone is probably going to be enough to bring in greater awareness and help inform some decisions. But
Right.
that's a really interesting exercise.
Yep.
So I guess with that, we're kind of getting close to wrapping up. But what are some practical tips that you would like to leave folks with to help elevate themselves as they're looking to either step into a leadership position or even improve on the leadership position that they might be in?
Yeah. So I don't advocate anybody elevating themselves into leadership. I think they've got to be invited. So I'd like to speak more to people, maybe to new leaders, new leaders, young leaders, and at any age, really. What I'm about to share is completely applicable to all of them. But I think it begins with Jim Rohn and a wide held understanding that we are the sum of the 5 people that we interact with most. And
Mhm.
I know that my life is the most on fire, complete, having the most impact when I have people like, for instance, I have, somebody in my life who's far ahead of me in business, far ahead of me in family, far ahead of me as an athlete, far ahead of me in a spiritual context, relationships, you know, you've got to assemble your team of 5 people, and you've got to connect those people and talk and be known and know them, because that is such a springboard to greatness. I think in the context of that very thing, the very second close idea is invest in yourself. You know, there are people that you love and admire that are going to speak into your life, but there have been large statistical studies which have taught us that if you pay for advice, there's a far greater chance of you taking it and integrating it. And so I'm
Mm.
a huge fan. You got to invest in yourself, get coached. Obviously, I'm a coach, and it would be odd for me not to say this, you know, but even if it's 3 sessions, and again, sure, I'd love for you to be coached by me, but get coached by anybody that you know is really doing well in their field, and there's a way to
Mhm.
figure that out. But get coached for 3 sessions with one idea and watch and see. I think you'd be amazed how much further you can advance an idea when a person is partnering with you to come alongside of you, not just to kind of lift up your strengths, but to really challenge some of these ideas that are just, they're off a few degrees, and all it takes is a great conversation. And then 2 more
Mm.
quick things. I think the third thing is study great leaders. You know, I mean, I've studied Patton. You know, I like
Mhm.
John Maxwell as a Christian leader. But you know, study 2 or 3 leaders, and then at some point you have to land. You know, you have to look at yourself, understand yourself, and go, you know, I really align with this person. I align with their values. There's something about their voice that draws me, and make a decision. If they've demonstrated great success and results, then become a student. Because if that person resonates with you, you're still being you, but there's a
Mhm.
reason why they're resonating you. It's a lot of times because they share values and they share um, ideas and beliefs. And then lastly,
Sure.
I'm a huge proponent on smart training. And smart training is just when you find things that really work, do them and do them consistently, because you can learn something in your 20s that was wildly impacting and you can forget it in your early 30s because you just don't use it anymore. And so, you
Mhm.
know, this idea of having routines and disciplines in your life to keep important ideas fresh is very, very important.
That's amazing, and I follow John Maxwell as well. I just love, all of his different books. I believe he's up to 85 now, if I'm not mistaken, so he's got a lot of great content there.
He does.
So I follow him as well, but yeah, I guess, is there anything else that you wanna share with folks? Anybody anything that just kinda stuck out to you as you were talking, or even some of the questions that I brought up?
You know, I guess I'll leave you with a couple of my favorite quotes. You know, I think an African proverb is, if you want to go, you know, fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think the first half of
Mm.
life is about going fast. I think as you get older, you realize you want to go far in life. And so you got to find your tribe. You know, you got to build your group. You know, you got to, one of our greatest threats is isolation. And I can go fall into it too. I mean, I'm fortunate that I've got wife and great kids and friends, and a spiritual ecosystem. And I've got a great group of guys that I ride bicycles with and motorcycles with, but it's easy to isolate. So I think if you want to go far, you got to go together. And then lastly, you know, Mark Twain, the quote that kind of launched my company is, you know, 20 years from now, it will be the things that we did not do rather than the things we did that
Mm.
we will regret. And so, you know, life is about taking the right risks. And all of us, you know, when we draw close to the end, I believe we just want to feel like, you know, we played our cards well. And yeah, we got bounced off the ground and we broke bones and bloodied our noses and we failed and we were damaged. But I know for me, I just want to feel like I went all in. You know, I went all in and I did so many things. And I just want to feel like I can say that I've lived a life. Yeah, it was difficult, tough, painful, hard, but with few regrets.
Mm. That's amazing, and I love those quotes, especially the African proverb. Definitely, brings on a new perspective for sure.
Yeah.
Joel, where can people find you online? How can they
So
get in touch?
www.theperformancegroup.us, like our country, or you can look me up
Mhm.
on LinkedIn, Facebook. The Performance Group has a fan page. I'm on Instagram. But
Hey.
if you like what you heard, even go on Amazon and just even read read the description of my book, Rewired: Power Up Performance, Relationship, and Purpose. And for any of your viewers, you know, I don't know, for the first 10 people that reach out to me, I'll even send them a free copy if they just give me their address. And so, but yeah, that's
Amazing.
how they can reach me.
Awesome. Well, Joel, thank you so much for that kind offer, and thank you so much for being here. We definitely appreciate your time, and you brought a lot of insight for us. So Thank you. Definitely some good nuggets to take away for sure. To folks listening, make sure to check out markadvantage.com for other great content and expert interviews like this. And that's it. So, Joel, thanks again.
Thanks, Devin.